Who was the first person ever buried in the
The
Abbey?
first person, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. I do know that the first burial that was finished in 1927, and somebody was buried here in 1927. Our most recent was 2002. And there were actually people that were interred, the cells that are down in this corner, some of them were buried in Green Lawn, and they were reinterred here when it was finished. This fellow, even though you're missing his gate, you would see a very important name on there. How many people recognize the name of Herb Penny? Everybody knows JC, of course, because that's what the name is. But this is Herb Penny. This is his brother. Now, most people don't know this, but at the time when most people were starting retail businesses, they started in the east and moved west. Well, the Pennies started in the west and moved east. So they started out west in Kemmerer, Wyoming, and JC stayed there, and he told his brother Herb, now you go on west and start a business. So they started in Columbus in about 1901. And so Herb liked it here an awful lot and stayed here his whole life. He was very important to many of the community groups that are here in Columbus. He was a founder of a lot of them. He loved to smoke. He smoked a lot of cigars, and he loved horses. He never saw the Kentucky Derby until he was on his, he was old, he was 66. And usually he said he was drunk before the time he got to the Kentucky Derby. So he never got to see the race until he was old and stayed home and watched it on the television. Now some of you guys might actually remember this fellow.
Go ahead.
George Smith. Anybody recognize that name? Anybody go roller skating downtown Columbus at the Inuka roller skating rink? Remember that?
Yeah.
Well, that's him. This is the guy that owned the roller skating rink. He and his wife never had any children, but he had the roller skating rink, and he was also a part owner in Olentangy Park.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So he was also a dance instructor before he got into roller skating.
Yeah.
I always like to point this crypt out because it's quite interesting. Mary Kay Miller is the most important person. There's another name at the top. I imagine that must be her sister. But if you look in here, her name is Mary Kay Miller. Her husband got husband, daughter, father, and mother. So obviously she wore the pants in the family. So that it always makes me happy. I have no idea about who she was or why it's like that. But now this crypt, if you notice, this is the only crypts in here that actually have faceplate attachments, and most people have no idea who this man is. But I would almost guarantee you that if you went home, you have something that he made in your house. Does that give you any ideas? Isaac Collins is the founder of Anchor Hocking Glass. Now I would almost guarantee you that if you have a glass, most people have glasses that were made by Anchor Hocking, and if you were to get your milk in an old bottle, it was made by Anchor Hocking Glass. And then of course his wife, that's him. Right here behind you is a fellow by the name of Charles Foster Johnson. Up there, see? He started the, how many people know the Columbus Country Club out east? He developed that land. Okay, he was quite a fella. He met his wife, who was a Dawes. Okay, and he met her way out east, and her mother was famous for saying he was from New Albany. His mother, or her mother, said to her daughter, "Don't marry him. Nothing good comes from New Albany." Imagine that. So he was quite a fellow. This Dr. Kirkendall, many of you may he died in Is that 52?
52.
62? He actually drowned in his pool. It was quite a controversy. They think he had a heart attack, but things weren't quite the way they are now, so I don't think they did too much investigating. This is George Cohn's. If your house was built before 1900, he probably got it from Cohn's lumber. All the lumber came from the Cohn's family. He died in 36, so that would have been his dad, but almost up until the point of the 1920s, they were selling lumber. But if your house was built from 1900 and before, it almost certainly the lumber came from Cohn's lumber, because it was one of the very few in Columbus. This crypt is an important crypt, I always think, because I think that there were two great people. There were two great people who loved Columbus and stayed here their whole lives. George and Katie Carb. George Carb was a 4-time mayor and 3-time police commissioner. Now, I'm going to tell you one story, and this doesn't really tarnish his name in my book, but at one point, crime was so rampant in Columbus, and he called the whole police force together, and he said, fellas, we need to cut down on this crime. And he said, and I got a perfect way to do it. And of course all the policemen were wondering what he was going to say. He said, stop picking up the prostitutes and stop picking up people that are opportuning for sex. He said, and that'll cut our crime rate in half and I'll get reelected. It worked.
Smart man.
4 times. But now of course, at that time, you know, he's a good guy. Don't let that affect your idea of him. Now, if you'll notice this crypt, it's the most elaborate and was the most expensive in the Abbey. Probably, we don't really know. We imagine that the crypts downstairs were somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000. So if that gives you, in 27, that ought to give you an indication of what this would have been worth. We figure somewhere between $1.5 million to $1.25 million. Okay? So, that being said, this is Louis Sells. He started the Sells Brothers Circus with his 3 brothers, and they traveled all over the United States. First, though, they started an auction company, and they were traveling with the circus, because of course you go where the crowds are. And then finally, the youngest brother, who I'm not going to be able to remember his name, Ad, the youngest brother said, you know, they make an awful lot of money with that circus. I think we ought to do away with the auction and have a circus. And of course the brothers are like, no. Finally, the youngest brother won, and they ended up with a circus. The circus was in business up until the 1900s, up until about 1920, I think it was, when John Ringling came in and bought the circus. It was reported that some of the cells were still there. It had gone through many transformation, but Ringling finally bought it for $125,000, which was nearly nothing. And the saddest story I could tell you about Louis Sells is the 2 days before he died, the circus was in town, and he said, I want to see the circus. Now, most people think of circuses with red and white tops, but at this time they were all white with silk. So he said, I want to go to the silk one last time. And he went into the show and was fairly sick to begin with. And he watched the entrance, which is where all the animals come through and all the performers. And after the entrance, he said, I can't make it any longer. And they took him out, and basically he slipped into a coma and died in 2 days. Unfortunately, his house has been torn down. It was not the bigger of the 2 houses. His other brother... I cannot remember their names for nothing.
So it's the brother that has the house like Goodale and Denison.
Yes, that's the house that's Goodale and Denison, it's actually under new ownership, but I think you can actually stay there. But it's a beautiful house. But so the Sells Brothers Circus was stationed here in the wintertime. They would come here and live. And if you know where Olentangy, basically where the Buckeye Club was, used to be I think that was a High-Lie right there on the corner. Across the street from that, right on the river, was a very long tract of land, and that was actually owned by Al Fields, who was a minstrel, and on the other side of that was Sellsville. which would be
Yes.
all where the Lenox is, basically.
Yeah.
Was Sellsville. And that's where all the animals would stay. And one other interesting thing,
Chambers Road.
how many people have ever, did anybody know, you guys know the movie that came out, Water for Elephants, right?
Yes.
You guys seen that advertised? There's in the back of it, they talk about the elephant Topsy, who is based on one of the elephants in the book kills a man for throwing a lit cigarette into her mouth. Topsy was a Sells elephant, and that actually did happen, and she did kill her trainer. Sells sold her to Coney Island, which in turn, there was a bad trainer there. I call him a bad trainer because he got killed too. Elephants are not really violent animals unless you're violent to them. So this other trainer was killed. At the time, the AC and DC current were fighting. There was Edison and Tesla, and they were talking about which ones were more harmful and dangerous. Well, Edison said, of course, is Edison the AC or DC? He was DC. Edison was DC, and Tesla was AC because that's what we had. He talked about how dangerous AC current was, and he demonstrated this electrocuting Topsy the elephant. I'm not kidding you. You can actually get on YouTube, and it's also the very first movie that Edison ever shot. But the good thing about it, I guess, was they had actually given her cyanide-laced carrots before they electrocuted her. So technically, she was on her way out anyway.
Yeah.
But can you imagine?